back, everyone. Thank you very much for your contributions during the table talks. So today we started the event off with a discussion about critical issues, about ethical use of generative AI in teaching and learning. Then during the table talks, we all had a discussion about different aspects of ethics and generative AI and how they reflect on students and on teachers in teaching and learning environments. And now, in this session, we're going to see what the current state of using generative AI here at DER, but also with our guests from other institutions. And I specifically asked our kind facilitators who have agreed to facilitate these discussions to categorize the input from all of the discussions into basically 4 categories. What are the challenges that you see? What are the opportunities that you see? What are practical ways to approach it in terms of sort of baby steps that we can all immediately start implementing in practice, whether it's learning or teaching? And also, the 4th category, are there some big ideas that we have that we want to set as a goal that we want to work toward? So, before we start the discussion, I would like to ask our panelists to briefly introduce themselves and then to summarize the discussions that we had before we dive into the conversation. Marlon, can I ask you to start us off since...
Hi.
And then we'll move this way.
Marlon Dominguez. I'm Data Protection Officer for the Erasmus University, also involved at Erasmus at and in that sense is generative AI relevant.
I'm Bas Smit. I work for the CEO office. I'm a Central Information Manager Education for the Erasmus University. And the main reason I'm here is that I'm busy working and actually already successfully testing a private version of ChatGPT that we can make available for education and perhaps in a later stage also for operations and research. And we're working on that.
Hello, I'm Laura. Sorry for the voice. I work in marketing for Liversity. Liversity is a hub on campus where we work on 21st century skills, so to future-proof education of students on campus. And for the past 2 months, we've been working with ErasmusX and with touring students to create a 4th session course on how to use AI for students that will be piloted in the next month. So we're really happy about that.
Hi, I'm Shruti. I work as a researcher at ErasmusX, and some of the projects I'm involved in are to find ways that AI can be used in education at and also to see how immersive technology can be a part of our education in the future. So that's why I'm here.
Shuli, assistant professor at Erasmus School of Law. Currently, my research focusing on how to use new technologies, especially AI, in a responsible and ethical manner.
My name is Ella Ekin, and I work as a consultant and learning innovation team at RSM Rotterdam School of Management. I have been working for AI in education and innovating our education for almost a year at our school.
Yeah, my name is Valdes Dovdaviches, RSM, also learning innovation team. I'm the newest addition and the counterpart of AI and many other projects, so that's why I'm here. Yeah.
So welcome, everyone. I have briefly touched base with everyone before we started the panel, and it looks like the discussions mostly revolved around opportunities and practical steps forward. I would like to, there's some challenges that I'm sure we will hear about, and a couple of big ideas as well. But I would like to start us off on a positive note with opportunities. Shruti has kindly volunteered to start us off, and then we'll go to Marlon and Bas. If I can ask you to mention the topic that your table talk covered, and then to quickly summarize what the takeaways have been.
Yeah, so my group was discussing generative AI and responsibility. And as expected, the conversation started with a lot of challenges and concerns and doom for at least about 20 minutes. But then surprisingly, there were a lot of opportunities that came out of it. There were a lot of new ideas, I think innovative ideas that came through, where there was ideas for open communication between the students and teachers with respect to the use of generative AI in both of their works. There was ideas of asking students to verify the information when they've received it from ChatGPT, but also if they can reference it in their work, that would be a step ahead where they can sort of fact check if everything is right, but also use it as a legible reference in their thesis or their assignments, which would sort of help improve the trust and accountability on their part as well. there were some ideas about how students and teachers both need to be trained in this skill of prompt engineering, and also just this idea of this new technology. How do you use it? How do you use it effectively and responsibly? That's something that needs to be taught as a new skill, and that needs to be there between teachers and students both at this point. I think that was the main takeaway for us, yeah.
Thank you. Marlon,
Yeah, so our topic was generative AI and inclusion. And to our surprise, of course, there's a lot of critical stuff to be mentioned. But to our surprise, one of the participants said, well, ChatGPT provides easy and free access to information for everyone, which which was not always possible given to licenses and specific buildings that you have to go to, or specific databases and so on. So that was in our mind already a sort of bias in with regards to the topic. It's all bad news that generative AI. So that was an opportunity, and at the end we also saw that this is indeed not specific ChatGPT, but generative AI is in the context of education can be useful and seen as a personal assistant. So the thing is, we know this in general, but the thing is, if it is a personal assistant and one of the team members, and not on a pedestal, providing all the true answers and so on, but someone in the team that you can debate with, and that could be very helpful in an example-based way of learning instead of problem-based learning. So that there were real opportunities. We also saw, of course, some challenges, but this was a good outcome, I think.
Thank you. And I will ask both the facilitators who are presenting and others if you see the connections between the opportunities that we're discussing. But before that, Bas, your group also at the table talk similarly identified primarily opportunities, right?
Yeah, so the topic we were talking about was generative AI and its role in higher education. And we had a really nicely mixed group with students and people from education being there, also someone from an exam board. One interesting statement that I immediately captured was, it's not about fraud. And what she actually meant to say with this is and I'm paraphrasing, so if I say it wrong, I'll hear it, but is that very often we're always looking from the fraud side, that people can use generative AI for fraud. But why not look at all the opportunities that are there? And there are lots of opportunities there. And later on, another student filled in with an example, actually an ErasmusX student, but I hope that that's okay, that mentioned that actually using generative AI helped her understand the material much better and in a much deeper level, and helped her prepare. And in the end, in spite of me insisting, she really insisted that it saved her a lot of time and she got to a better understanding. So I found this very interesting, actually. And in the discussion, some of the things that came up, we came to the conclusion that it's about the tool and the human side, and we need to make sure that we help the people to reflect, and therefore we need to guide them. And well, this is also one of the things that we said are the steps we should be taking as a university to help in reflecting and guide people in using it properly.
If I may.
Please.
Yeah, so in our breakout session, we also discussed the approach that we use, and to encourage and guide, just to add to really beautiful thoughts, and how we use it, ChatGPT. Is it generative or is it creative? You know, and are you using just for the sake of chasing information, or do you use it consciously and cautiously to guide your critical thinking, you know, your academic writing skills, your idea generation? So it all depends, you know, whether, you know, what the intention is there, and how we perceive using AI, you know, just through it and with it. Yeah, so this is really how we communicate, you know, what the tool is for and what it could do to you beyond, you know, the copy-pasting the prompt and copy-pasting the output.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And your group was on generative AI and how we perceive
And how we
generative.
perceive
Yeah.
it, yes.
Thank you. I'm already seeing some overlaps here because Bas, you mentioned you discussed the role of generative AI in higher education, and you mentioned its use as a co-pilot, as an assistant, as a personal assistant or academic assistant that you mentioned, Valdas. And I know from previous discussions that overlaps with the discussion on inclusion and access. We just recently actually had an interesting experiment by one of our teachers here at Erasmus University, who gave her students the opportunity to use ChatGPT for an assignment or not to use it. It was entirely their decision. And she said in the end, basically their grades were roughly the same. An interesting question that she's going to ask probably in the next round is, before they decided whether to use ChatGPT, how confident were they that they can do the assignment well? Because there's a good chance that people who do feel confident, they're not going to skip that and say, I'm going just to hone my own skills and deliver my product. People who are not feeling confident are thinking, I need that personal assistant, I need that tutor or mentor who can help me get up to speed with everyone else so that I can deliver product and basically be that way it establishes a level playing field. So it's really an issue of access. In addition to the role of generative AI. I see there already, if I'm judging the faces right, there are some thoughts already on this.
Someone mentioned an example in the group which has a slightly nuanced outcome versus what you mentioned, where generative AI was used and by some of the students and some didn't use. And in the end, and it was more or less like a writing assignment, a thesis, where you could say that the students using generative AI had maybe more text, more use of different words, etc. But the arguments in the thesis were actually of a lot less quality. Whereas the students who didn't choose to use generative AI, and I hope I'm mentioning the example correctly and I memorized it, actually maybe had less good text, so to say, but their argumentations were a bit better. So on that level, there seems to be some form of difference in the outcome.
Can I counter-argue with that?
Please.
It's one of the reasons one of the problems here is because we are not teaching our students how to use it, how to evaluate the output. So if they are left on their own and they need to use it and they see, okay, this is opportunity right in front of me, why not using it? And then they come up, so they cannot. That's one of the problem and challenges that we have here. We are not offering them the opportunity that, okay, we are here. If you have questions, if you need help, we are here for you. That doesn't exist.
Yeah. No, I agree with you completely. That's also the guidance part that we came up with. It's very important to do clearly. Yeah.
And it shifts, it goes back to the question that our panel at the beginning asked, sort of, what are the things that we fundamentally maybe need to look to change in teaching and in education? And maybe there's less of drafting when it comes to textual output to essays, for example, and more of evaluation. And I think, yes, Bas?
Yeah, well, you're asking the question, what are the things we need to change? We did touch upon that discussion, and yes, I'm moving into a different field, so I apologize. So what do we need to change? One of the things was very clear. We need to change how we look at assessment and how we do assessment. That is very important to look at. On the other side, what was also interesting is that there are a lot of things that we actually don't really need to change. Critical thinking and a certain number of basic skills, well, maybe they become even more important than they always were. And we should focus on them more and teach them because, as someone mentioned in the group, a certain basic skills on how to summarize a text, for example, or some things, you need to be able to do. If you don't learn this as a student at some point, then how are you going to be able later also to evaluate whether an answer from a system can actually provide enough depth and is a good one or is a good summary? So a number of the basic skills, the critical thinking skills in how to evaluate, well, we can focus even more on them. We're probably already doing, and I suppose we're doing. But assessment, there we definitely will need to adapt.
Yeah, I was actually there during that part, and I remember the two examples that were given, or one example that if, for example, for master's thesis or a longer essay, you can get a good enough essay using ChatGPT by going only through 3 rounds of prompting, then that particular essay or that thesis is not a good way to assess your work and what you have learned. So either the prompt for that essay needs to be changed, or maybe essay in itself is not really the right format for it. So yeah, thank you. Marlon?
Yeah, what I took away from the first Explore meeting was that if you from a teacher perspective, I really like that session. That if you use that was ChatGPT. If you use ChatGPT well, it takes you. It doesn't cut time in preparation, but it expands the time in preparation. So usually people say, "Oh, you use ChatGPT for the cutting time or the convenience or easiness part, laziness part." But so in terms of the experiment that you mentioned, it could well turn out to be that the smarter students they actually they also want to use ChatGPT because they get a different level of quality assurance because they have extra debates with their pilot or their assistant and have access to more sources and so on. So I think so in general I think that there's two aspects: there's the way you use the tool and what you can expect from tooling, and that you know that you are aware of what's in it and why there are certain biases and on which levels I just wanted to mention one thing that came up in our discussion, and I think it's a general question to ask here also. So there are biases in the data in society and so on. So why does generative AI why do we want it to have less biases than we have in society already? And I think that's a really interesting question. I still don't know how well to answer this. But.
Now that you've raised the question, I'm wondering if we should move to the groups that did actually focus on practical steps forward. And I know that Laura and Shu, would you like to? Sure, thank you.
So my group topic is about AI, generative AI and learning. So we try to discuss how the generative AI reshapes the relationship between teachers and students. So I think this is we have a very fruitful discussion, and also our group is very diverse. So we have not only students from Rotterdam School of Applied Science, and also we have researchers, professors from, for example, ESSB, and also from Health Law Department. So we are a very diverse group, and but also this means that we found using ChatGPT to reshape this relationship between teachers and students. We cannot easily define the one-size-fits-all group, which approach, which means that, for example, when we are discussing with students from Rotterdam School of Applied Science, we find that, for example, most of them applicable scenario is using ChatGPT to, for example, generating or to testing the codes. So that is what they mostly frequently used, and actually their teachers this is also very interesting because they try to encourage them to use ChatGPT in the first place if they find any questions. So ChatGPT actually is the first stop, and then the teacher comes in. But for example, for different departments, for example, from ESSB and also from my faculty ESL. We actually, to some extent, are not clear about this approach. It's either because, for example, we are not doing so heavy coding in the first place, and also we are not sure how this ChatGPT can be integrated in our teaching. So this is, to some extent, very different from one field to another field. And we reached to some agreement. That's baby step that you put here. First of all, we really need a kind of a guideline. So this is very important. Either it is for coding practice or it's from other practice. And this guideline should be to some extent bottom up, which means that it should not be some authority make it without discussion with students or teachers. It should be in a collaboration way. So teachers and students, we should discuss how it should be developed. And also, there's also very interesting, to some extent, suggestion, for example, from ESFB. We also learn, also this is exactly what I take in my class, AI regulation governance. So we try to do more oral exams rather than writing assignments. So we want to test students whether they really have this kind of knowledge. So, but this is to some extent some baby solutions, baby steps. So we try to explain more in the near future.
Thank you. This was from the group on generative AI and learning, and then Laura.
Yeah, I actually want to go back to what Marlon said
please.
about the
Yeah.
bias, because that also came out on our discussion. Some student mentioned, yeah, well, we already have, like, yeah, it's biased, and the internet is also biased, and people are biased. So why are we trying to make AI non-biased? Because you can also ask a professional, and they're also going to have their own type of answer that is going to be biased based on whatever background or research, or they're all also fed information that they have. And that sort of take us to also a little bit of this spiral of kind of doomsday of what can we then trust, because our topic was Gen AI and trust. So we sort of brought it up a little bit first and basically discussed that now you cannot trust anything online, right? Because a lot of things can be AI generated. And then we went back to, okay, but how does this apply to teaching and learning? And I think the main thing that we could distinguish was like, yes, AI is great as an assistant, which you also mentioned. It's great for exploration and it's great to giving us, for example, rough drafts, especially if it works on statistics. So it might give us a trustworthy draft or guideline on how to do certain things. But then we saw that there were several challenges that appeared. Like for once, when you talk about knowledge, and especially knowledge questions, with large language models, you have a lot of, it's really volatile. The output can change. And as someone really mentioned, it can start speaking Spanglish to you, for example, or who knows which crazy things. It can also be really delusional. So you can really not trust what it gives you, which means there's a responsibility for both teachers and students to fact check a lot of things. I think it went really well with your discussion. Who is really responsible for the output? And at the same time, as can we sell a little bit our knowledge if we just trust the first output that ChatGPT give us? So if we only go to this idea of I put an input and I take the first output, you're also limiting your own knowledge. And a lot of the time, students don't have the resources to prompt properly the AI, so you will get more in-depth questions, or that the AI will prompt to you to give it more input so you could have more interesting things. So as a group, sort of like the solution that came up was twofolded. So for once, on the teacher side, we'll be having certain tools that can flag this AI use so we can also know a little bit more on how to interact with it. Because one thing that was fairly clear is that because there's no specific guidelines, there was a professor that gave an example. They have a paper with 83% AI on the paper. What do we do with that? What does that actually mean? And was it used because they fixed the language, for example, because the student doesn't know how to write, or is the ideas that were there? So a little bit more on those flags that can tell us more about the content. But then also, and it was brought by the students, especially a student that says he doesn't use ChatGPT because he doesn't trust anything that comes out of it, that maybe we should try to have language models that are somehow accredited so that we can know that the sources are fairly valid, that the model is using valid sources. And it was also, again, this parallel with people. So the same as we have people getting PhDs and people getting accredited in medicine or law, you should have the same maybe with language models. So when you're using it for specific things like law or medicine, it will give you solid outputs and not things that could risk a life or, you know. So those were our main takeaways. Yeah.
Thank you. I heard multiple things, and just to summarize sort of the question, why try to undo bias in generative AI? I'm not sure if we answered that question, but I know there was the discussion on that topic in the group on inclusion. Who is responsible for the output? And it goes back to the conversation, I think, to the topic that we just discussed in terms of putting more focus on evaluation of what is written. And then the need to become better at prompting is another thing that I heard. And then going back to, again, a point that was raised a little bit earlier, which is in textual output, the value of argumentation versus the value of just having polished text on a grammatical and syntactical level, being able to distinguish and prioritize arguments over polished language. I've seen hands, so who would, rather than me?
I can give you a go.
Ella, please.
I please don't take me wrong. I am one of the persons like that has been trying to promote the idea of embracing AI a lot in education. I can write a long list of how it can be implemented in education. But coming to the challenges, first of all, the teachers, lecturers, and researchers that we have here are overworked. It needs experimentation. It needs drastic change in the infrastructure of the university. Who is responsible for implementing those changes? Who is offering the facilities and the things that the students and the lecturers need to embrace the AI in education? Let alone getting into details of is it bias, is it not, etc. It's a fancy, it's a kind of luxury to get to those questions. First of all, we need to understand how it's going to help us for our education, how we can make it happen. I know we are working on the license, and it's wonderful that we are having it, but if it is not meeting our needs and what we want to do, especially if you are a little bit more advanced in using AI, and what I have the license for is not doing the same thing for me, thank you. I appreciate your effort and the finance and every investment that you have had in it, but I'm going to find it somewhere else. That's another challenge, to convince people to stay there and use it, for example, that one. Two, who is going to teach or train the lecturers and researchers to use that? Poor people that are up here. Then again, also the lecturers need to find time to explore how it works. Then again, another challenge. Rules and regulations. There are different types of AIs that can be used. For example, literature review. We're talking about research and proposals. So if we can use those kind of AI tools to do literature review, is it still valid that we want the students to have those kind of skills? Do we need to revisit our thesis manuals and say, we don't need that anymore? Who's going to do that? And there are a list of other challenges as well.
Thank you. Sure.
I will simply reply or reflect two issues. One is a bias issue. My answer is very simple because bias there. So AI actually enhance some bias, especially this bias based on, or it can enhance some vulnerability. So this is something that we need to be very careful because bias in the context of AI is even more difficult to explain and to detect. But for example, if we talk bias in person, this is a very direct discrimination, for example. But the bias and discrimination in AI, this is even more difficult to detect. So this is something I'd like to reflect. And for the accountability issue, maybe I ask more questions because this is also what I focus on, for example, how to allocate accountability between different parties. Normally, from a legal perspective, the answer is easy. So who has the most information or who has the best capacity to avoid this risk or harm, they should take the responsibility. So this is also understandable. But I think for AI or for generative AI, the question is sometimes we cannot find such a kind of party, which means that to some extent we find that there are a lot of, I call it unknown risk. So this risk, we cannot find such a person to obtain such kind of information and to take efforts at the cheapest cost. So I think this is the question that sometimes we cannot find such a party, and if we cannot find such a party, we cannot assign the accountability. So.
While we're on the topic of bias, I know there was a very interesting discussion on bias in the group on inclusion. I will try to summarize the part that I've heard, that I was there for, and Marlon, please feel free to jump in if I'm missing any pieces. There was an interesting point made that one of the members mentioned, it was like, well, until this point, I wasn't really aware that I had bias in the sense that I assumed that everyone wants to be less biased and wants to do better. And that's not necessarily the case. Bias is not on everyone's radar, and not everyone is trying to do anything about it. And one of the questions was like, what's the reason behind, should we try to make AI less biased, and what's the reason behind it? If we work with the reality that biases in AI reflect biases in the society. I think the legal perspective that you provided, I think, matches with sort of what I know from the teaching perspective, which is that whenever we try to present information that aim to be credible for example, journalism, or in this case, generative AI, simply lots of people assume that that's credible information, that we need to work towards making that information as reliable as possible, and at the same time, less bias. Because the outputs from those sources are going to provide either positive modeling or negative modeling. And we presumably want to go with positive modeling, both for people who are aware and want to do better, but also for people who are just sort of more subconsciously picking up on messages, biased messages that are being communicated by these sources. I added one piece that was not part of the conversation, but I'm hoping it matches accurately that part. Let me ask a question from, while we were thinking about the next step, a question from the audience. Were there some practical ways that came up during the table talks on how we should move forward with regard to generative AI within our context, specifically our context, Erasmus University, but hopefully that translates to other educational institutions as well?
Yeah, I think I mentioned them already before, as in helping people to reflect and giving guidance, and both to teachers and to students. And the form of how we need to do this, I think it's a fair point. Do we have the capacity for it, and how can we support this? So we have to look at the form for this, but that is one of the baby steps that we can do. And in a minute, I want to add one more point that was mentioned here, but I don't know if right now is the point at the moment.
Please.
One of the things that was mentioned here in my group was also that we really need to look at the environmental impact and make people aware when you're using these models. And also that it's our responsibility as a university to make students aware of the impact of using such models. And it doesn't mean that you can't use them at all. It just means that you need to be aware when you use them, but also which ones you're using. We had the discussion, should you always be using the biggest, the greatest, the newest? Well, no, that depends very much on the goal that you're trying to achieve, and perhaps you can use a slightly less worse model, because I guess they're not good in their environment. And we should, I also had a discussion here in the university that we need to look at the fact that we want to be an environmentally sustainable university with a zero footprint. So if we're going to be using a lot of these models, that means we have to do something to offset this. I don't know how, I don't have an answer, but it is an important point to also take along.
Thank you. For this event, by the way, we kind of deliberately left sustainability aside because we felt that's a big topic to discuss on its own, but you raised an important, you raised a really good point that even within the context of teaching and learning, there's a way to bring that discussion in and to make an impact while doing that in small ways, but also practical ways. Marlon?
Yeah, just to add to the baby steps stuff and the challenges, in our group we also talked about AI literacy, but underlying also computer literacy, and perhaps that is even still at our university an issue, also for staff and for students. So we use these things, but do we use them in the right way? And we implement software, but do we implement it in the right way? Is it by design provided to us in the way that we would be expected to use it? And I think those are difficult. I just want to touch upon it, but those are difficult issues. So aside from training people, you can imagine there's different levels of awareness and knowledge. How do you address that? And is there one course for everyone? Should you do that on an annual basis to enhance and should certain roles be more trained than other roles within the? So this would be interesting to see how the community as a whole would reflect on this, I think.
There's a question actually related to that, to the facility of use and the need for training. Maybe at the beginning, AI might have a steep learning curve, but eventually it should make the user's job easier. And I'm going to add to this, and save time, right? Is time really the issue when teaching staff and students about generative AI?
So this is one of the things that we are trying to do. We are trying to help the educators to embrace AI and use it in their education. But it depends, first of all, they need to think about how they want to use it, for what purpose they want to use it. Finding the idea is one thing. Two, finding the AI tool that is relevant for them and is going to meet their need is another thing. 3, exploring that it was giving them the results that they were hoping for, if not, taking the lessons from that. 4, then evaluate it and improve it for the next year, for example, for the other cohort that is coming in. So it causes also unfairness between the students and the cohorts that are coming in and are leaving the university because we have 1-year master programs. So that is one thing. If we suggest them an AI tool to use it, for example, I don't know how many people are using ChatGPT here. We are not judging. So I have ChatGPT 4, for example, and I spend a lot of time on seeing and experimenting with it, how it can help our lecturers to use it for different purposes, for example. So that is also time consuming for me to find those ways and then go back to the lecturers and say, okay, now tailor it to your context. And then every time they have a question, come back and then make sure that the assessment methods that they are using for those educational purposes is matching those educational objectives. And then we are preparing students and the lecturers to kind of embed it also in the courses. So it is really time consuming. But is it worth it? It is super rewarding, I would say. So that's one thing to kind of take with me, at least from this.
And you mentioned it's time-consuming, but it's rewarding. And there was that piece. So, is it all? Can it become time-saving?
You cannot learn all the AI tools. There is no way. I can say with ChatGPT 4, I am experimenting a lot, but I cannot do it for everything. So I've been trying with other AI tools, but I cannot trace everything. Like every day, I am receiving 5 new AI tools for different purposes. And every time I try them briefly, but I cannot do it. It's impossible to do it for all the AI tools. There's no way.
One quick follow-up question for you, Ella. Do you have an AI literacy module for students yet?
We are trying to develop that. So that is on our radar.
Working on it.
Yes, working on it.
In our next Explore event, hopefully we'll have something to announce. If I may also add about the time-saving thing, we mentioned that students are under a lot of pressure in terms of the expectations which are sort of piling up over time. The same goes for teachers.
Exactly.
Originally, they were supposed to be experts in their discipline. That was enough.
But
then
now?
they have to be experts in pedagogy, they have to be experts in inclusion, they have to be experts in or at least knowledgeable well enough in student well-being, in technology, in helping students with professional and personal skills. All good things, wonderful, but also incredibly time-consuming. One glimmer of hope, I would say, is that this is the first one that we're adding to the list that can actually be time-saving in the long run.
And it is quite habitual, if you will, because it is a system. So as soon or as long as we learn it, so then we know it. So of course, in the beginning, it is time consuming. As with most of the technologies that we use, smartphones, when it first appeared, at least for me, like I was like very tech savvy, it took a while, but now, it's my life, it's my work, everything is in here, and I'm comfortable using with every new edition I buy. So I guess same with the ChatGPT, and if we kind of put into this habit, let's say in the formative assessment, students learn how to use it. Yes, it's a time-consuming, but when the summative assessment comes, voila, they already know everything, and then it's definitely time-saving. Yeah.
Thank you. Marlon, yes.
I just wanted to add, so we are focusing on our staff and our faculty and our students, but there was an interesting example from our group, from a colleague from the Idea Center, where they developed a training educational course for 12 to 14-year-olds, how to work with AI, and that is also one of the things that can be expected of a university, right? So not only within ourselves, but also in our collaborations, but even into society in a broader sense. So yeah, just wanted to add that to the.
Thank you. There's a question that's very broad, but very interesting and very good question to ask. What were things that caught you by surprise during the table talks? Shruti? Thank you.
I think when I chose this topic of AI and responsibility, I was very skeptical about it. I thought that it would just be a blame game where people would say, okay, students have to take the responsibility or the faculty is responsible for it. But surprisingly enough, as quickly as people could come up with concerns, people are already thinking about the next step ahead or how to support each other. And it was clear that everybody understands that this is a complex system with multiple stakeholders involved. But how can we ensure that everybody is getting a chance to voice their opinions and has a place on the table at this discussion? So there were a lot of ideas of co-creating a manifesto, a set of rules that can be valid at the university. But if educators and students can come together and say, how do we use ChatGPT at the university? Let's sit down and put down some like guidelines itself. So that's the starting step already.
Yeah, the theme of co-creating the guidelines and policies seems to be really coming through. And maybe it falls also into the idea of rethinking educational models, because we do have that very, very ingrained model of the teacher being the source of authority and the source of knowledge in the classroom, and students are there to listen and follow and do what they're told. Whereas here, it's very hard to be an expert on AI in the room unless you're actually, that's your expertise, and there are very few people who are specifically doing research on it. So in that case, we all have to catch up, and we're relatively on the same level. It's the playing field where we have to work together rather than pretending that someone can take the mantle of authority in the room. Valdis and then Bas.
Just quickly, to add, exactly. So we kind of, with this, we kind of shifting from a transactional way of learning to more transformational.
Yeah.
You know, so we kind of co-creation and co-collaboration mirror, I guess, right? Yeah. So she was telling that, you know, both parties need to speak, you know, with each other. Same with our AI policy that we work. It's not a document for teachers and for students. It's a one cohesive document that both parties are aware. Teachers know what students will be doing with that one. Same students know what teachers would be doing with that one. So it's really this transformational aspect of learning. Yeah, I like that approach, yeah.
I'll ask others if anything else caught them by surprise, but Bas first. You.
Well, what continuously positively surprised me is that everybody is basically saying it's here, it's going to stay, and we look at it from, let's say, the glass is half full and not half empty. And I really like that here, that everybody's looking like this. What was also interesting is at some point, someone came up with, let's say, the idea of the craftsmanship. So you still need these basics to learn, and you can't outsource that to an AI model.
Yet.
Well, so this is an interesting debate, and that's the question. And in part, I'm on your side, because I also think that in part that is going to happen. However, certain skills you need to do a number of steps to really get these skills and to become good at it, and you still need to have them. But for a lot of it, probably these kinds of supports are going to take a part of that away, which means that we're not going to learn certain things anymore. Maybe we need to make that more conscious.
There was a question based on the opportunities or challenges that you have found. What kind of support from the university, from Erasmus University or a different university that you're affiliated with, do you need in order to move forward? Ella?
I really need the university. We all need to take a stance. Are we going to go for it or not? To what extent? For God's sake, please make your mind so we can decide and plan things. That's what I need strongly, as you can feel it.
She took us to church.
No,
So policy.
thank you. Yes, we are open to every belief. So whatever you believe in, I'm okay. But just make your mind.
Speak, sister, speak.
Support from the university. Anyone else?
No, a clear
Bas?
choice so that we can really move ahead. And I think we're doing that, but the clear choice has not been made, and that would really be helpful. I agree.
And that falls into what we heard at the last event in November, which was clear policies, clear guidelines, but also support for how to use it. Because again, it's new to all of us, and we're all trying to catch up.
Yes, that's a big part of it, but also clear choices on if we're going to support it. It means we need to make certain things, and in the end, also resources, funds available so that we can make it happen. And as long as we keep debating this type of question, we can only do it halfway, which means that it's always just too short.
Yeah, my idea is that try to make some applicable guidelines at the university level for sure, which apply to all faculties. But we still also need to consider the flexibility issue. I think it's just like making an EU law. sometimes we have a very full harmonization law, but sometimes we also need to make sure that the member states have some flexibility about explaining some issues. And I think this is also apply to different faculties, because, for example, in my group, we really find that there are different ways when using ChatGPT, because they use ChatGPT to solve quite different problems, and their using scenarios are quite different, and also the suggestion will be different. So I think we really need to also consider these flexibility issues. Yes.
Flexibility. Thank you. Another question was for the guidelines on generative AI use within education, higher education. What are your 3 top subjects in the guide that you think is important to know for both teachers and students?
The first one that came up, and I'm not saying about priority, but is transparency. So you have to be clear on when you use it and how you use it, and document it, whether you're a teacher or student.
And since I was mentioning that, let's say, formative assessment it's a learning curve, and then the summative assessment is where you kind of apply what you learned and you really use AI for academic writing purposes. So AI in assessment and clear guidelines, I guess, should be a core point, and the academic misconduct / fraud, because students prefer, I guess, misconduct, and the academic staff is more on the fraud side, so all these need to be outlined clearly. Yeah, so these like misconduct, fraud, and AI in assessment.
And presumably positive turn on it in terms of academic integrity, how to do it well, not just avoid what not to
exactly,
do.
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Top 3, Shu?
Yeah. There's also one suggestion from my group, and I find this very interesting and find might be helpful, is that, for example, when students are using ChatGPT to do something like a written assignment, in the methodology part, the teacher should encourage students to say, or to maybe a transparency issue, how did you use ChatGPT, and for which purposes, which part are you using ChatGPT? If you can explain it to some extent, then teacher can better understand how you learn also from interacting with this new technology. So it might also be interesting to explore in that way.
Can I say something about that? It's one of the things that, again, we did. We have been having these interviews also with the students, like anonymously, to make them sure that they can openly communicate to us. One of the problems with asking them to honestly say and actually communicate how they have been using it is because they are afraid of saying so, because they don't know if I say I have used it in this particular way, am I going to get in trouble or not? I might be referred to the examination board. Talking about policy document and guidelines, they need to know what constitutes fraud, misconduct, plagiarism, and that's something that we are missing. So if we want them to openly and honestly communicate to us that this is the way that we are using it, they need to know they are going to be safe. And automatically they are not going to be referred to the examination or get in trouble. So that's one of the problems that, again, another challenge that we are facing here. We need to rely on their confess also if they say, I know, I copy-pasted from X and Y.
Yeah, which links to a really interesting example that came up in the group, which I really liked, where this process was supported, and then AI detection tools were used, and well, let's not have a discussion on how good they are or not. But what I found really important is that when it was shown that a student would have used AI to generate a piece of text, it was not the response to say, fraud, it's rejected, but it was more, we're going to reflect with you. How did you do? Why did you do? You need to be transparent. You need to show what is your own argument here, and to help the student actually to do it in a proper way, and then to move forward. So that way you can help and teach them to do it in the right way. And then they can also have the trust in, I can share, because I'm not going to get a stamp immediately of being a fraud. And it was a really good approach, I think.
Marlon?
Again, the last Explore session, I was really blown away by the example that a colleague from TU Delft provided, where he created a screen where he saw the prompts of his students, and he could see how they were working and how they were prompting, and he could reflect on that. So that is, I think, those are examples and good. So examples of how good education AI supported education looks like. And so aside from the principal statements and so on and the guidelines, we also need some, so how does good look like and how does bad look like? And we need some examples of this. So this is also what you are providing with these discussions. But sometimes, and I think because of the lack of that, people get scared and don't communicate because what is good and perhaps the intentions are good, but people see it as, oh, you're cheating and so on. So, and sometimes this will happen, of course, but that people don't see the nuance in using these tools. And one last thing I wanted to say, and this was not discussed. We are looking at the education process, but we also, aside from ChatGPT, have tooling that has built-in AI stuff that we use for education, aside from ChatGPT. And that is something that we also have to be aware of, that these so-called dashboards that are created, they also have a logic that is not transparent to us. And that we so also the stuff that we buy to enhance, so even in Canvas and stuff, so the tools that we use other than generative AI could have components that we also should be aware of, also in terms of bias and stuff, and should be able to explain to the staff and students why is it there and what it does.
Thank you. And on the note that you brought up right now in terms of knowing what not to do, but also knowing what to do and how to do it, I think we are out of time, but also a good note to end on. So not just about challenges, not just about opportunities, but really about the balance that we need to strike as we move forward. As Aristotle and Cardi B mentioned at the very beginning of our event. And also it reminds me of something that when we did a survey on how people at universities are using ChatGPT, we did the survey months ago. It was interesting that very often, specifically teachers, when we asked them a question about the opportunities that they see with generative AI, they was like, well, I can use it for this and this and this and this and this. When we asked about concerns, they said, oh, students are going to cheat and students are going to do this. I was like, hold on a second. But I bring this up because I think one of the strongest common threads that we have heard is really the need for co-creation and to work on this together. So that we do strike the balance, but we also address different needs that all of us have as we become better at both using generative AI and in integrating it in teaching and learning. On that note, I am happy to announce that at ErasmusX, we would like to continue this conversation, not only through future Explore events, but also to do it on a bit more regular basis. And not just about ethical issues of generative AI, but more broadly about other aspects of generative AI in teaching and learning. So very soon we will be announcing monthly meetups that we will organize and that we're going to invite students and teachers to join and to work together. Monthly meetups doesn't mean that you have to show up every month. You can choose when to show up, but to engage in conversation, we will set a topic for each time. We might or might have a little bit of homework to do to prepare for the conversations, but the goal is to come up again with practical outcomes that we can share with the university community and that both teachers and students can pick up on and use in their practice, be it practical tools, or maybe even if we're just having a productive discussion and coming up with insights that we want to share, a blog or a short white paper, but practical things that will result from these meetings. If you have registered with us, I trust everyone has, and we have your emails. We will send a follow-up email to follow up on this event. And in that email, we will provide more information about the monthly meetups that we will organize, and we hope to see many of you there. In the meantime, please join me in thanking our facilitators. Thank you, everyone in the audience. We didn't get to all the questions that you have asked, but I really appreciate all the questions that you have posed. We tried to answer as many of them as we could. And we look forward to seeing you soon. But before that, we have refreshments for you outside, and we hope to see you there, continue conversation, or just chat about something else. Thank you very much.